Let me start again with a question. What is the place of weakness in the Christian life? And perhaps more to the point, is there a place for appropriately sharing our own weaknesses with those around us in our church family? If we were to do it, what would be the point? If we were to do it, who would it benefit? How could that sort of thing adorn the gospel? Over the next 2 weeks, this is what we are going to explore. What it looks like, perhaps, to boast in weakness. You'll notice in the outline, this is Boasting in Weakness, Part 1. In this passage, the Apostle Paul shows significant vulnerability. He shows his weakness. From the very end of the passage, from verse 31, the God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of the Damascenes guarded in order to arrest me, but I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hands. This is a very personal and vulnerable moment. Paul is disclosing something in his ministry that is in no way to be considered a highlight. It doesn't show him as strong, it doesn't show him as competent, it doesn't show him as full of flair for the gospel. It shows him as weak. He goes to Damascus, if you remember, breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's people and looking to arrest anyone he saw that was a follower of Jesus. But on the way, he gets converted. He becomes not just a follower of Jesus, but also tasked with the apostleship to the Gentiles, to the non-Jews, to the world. And now he leaves Damascus, by human standards, pathetic. He isn't chasing after anyone. There are no threats. Now he's the one who's being chased, and he's the one who's being persecuted. A big switch has happened. From Acts 9, where Luke records this story, see how the situation is described. Paul preaches in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God, proving that Jesus is the Messiah in a way that baffled the Jews in Damascus. And then, chapter 9, verse 23, after many days had gone by, there was a conspiracy among the Jews to kill him. But Saul learned of their plan. Day and night they kept close watch on the city gates in order to kill him. And as a result, he had to sneak out of a window and down a wall like a criminal. Verse 25, but his followers took him by night and lowered him in a basket through an opening in the wall. And why does Paul say all of this? Why does he share this kind of vulnerable moment? I think the point is around showing the priority and paradigm of Christian ministry and life. From the very beginning of Paul's apostolic ministry, he went from strong in the eyes of the world to weak in the eyes of the world. This is the foolishness of the cross by the world standards. Chapter 11, verse 30, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. At the moment of crisis, when things got tough, I, the Apostle Paul, God knows that I am not lying, I fled, lowered down by a basket. If I'm going to boast about my ministry, what kind of apostle I am, here it is. I am a weakling. And he tells this story, remember, in the context of false teachers, of super apostles. They are criticizing him heavily. They say that he is unimpressive. They boast in themselves. They call Paul inferior as an apostle. They say Paul mustn't be legitimate because he won't even accept their money. Basically, they criticize Paul on his theology, and they criticize him on the way that he conducts his ministry. They call him two-faced, a wimp in person and a tough guy in his letters. And also, he's not very impressive in the way that he's doing things. He doesn't really have the sort of gifts that are worthy of a great orator with good rhetoric, impressive looks. He doesn't have any of these things. And knowing the context and criticism that Paul is facing, he goes ahead and does what he said earlier was really foolish to do. Paul boasts, and he boasts a lot. And he's boasting in order that he might protect his people. You remember from last time the strong language he used. I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. I promised you to one husband, to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to him. But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the spirit you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it easily enough. He's jealous for the people he loves, the Corinthian Christians. He wants to protect them from false teaching. And so, boasting like a fool, he compares his ministry against theirs to show what the actual difference is. Verse 16, I repeat, let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then tolerate me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. In other words, I really hate this. But for the sake of you, I'll boast like the super apostles do. They boast about their self-confidence. I can do that as well. But just to understand, I'm not speaking like Jesus. No, Jesus speaks with humility. Jesus doesn't consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Jesus made himself nothing. Jesus was born in a lowly animal feeding trough. Jesus doesn't have the creaturely comforts he's surely worthy of. Jesus even humbles himself to the point of death on a cross, like a capital punishment-deserving criminal. Paul says, no, I'm not speaking like Jesus. I'm speaking like a fool. And as a fool, Paul speaks with irony and sarcasm. Verse 19, you gladly put up with fools since you are so wise. In your wisdom, you put up with fools gladly. And so indulge me for a little while as I play the fool, as I criticize these fools that you put up with. And Paul clarifies with some intensity why he needs to criticize the fools, and also what the Corinthians seem to be putting up with, even though they should never put up with this sort of thing. Verse 20, in fact, you even put up with someone who enslaves you, or exploits you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or slaps you in the face. For those of you who don't know, the idea of airs here is being presumptuous or arrogant, showing that they are actually better than they are. And the point overall is a list of criticisms. Paul calls out the false teachers for what they really are. Here's what they do. They enslave, they exploit, they take advantage, they presume, and they even strike you in the face. And you put up with it. I'm pretty sure you can't get a sentence that is more obviously the opposite of what Christian ministry should look like. If you are a disciple of Jesus, then you are all about self-sacrifice. If you are a disciple of Jesus, then your Christian ministry, serving others, is cross-shaped. Christian ministry is about laying down one's life for one's friends. In fact, even in terms of apostleship, Paul talks about this in chapter 10. He says, even if I boast somewhat freely about the authority the Lord gave us for building you up rather than tearing you down. Paul appeals to the church, remember, by the humility and gentleness of Christ. In the way that these false apostles are acting, there is no building up going on, and there is no humility and gentleness that matches that of Jesus going on. Think of it a bit like this. The chips in the bank that I have as a minister of the gospel, that all of us have in our various ministries, they are all relational chips. That is, people listen carefully and are willing to hear from people that they trust, that they have relationship with. That involves words and an attitude that are clearly showing genuine love for the other person, clearly showing that they want what is genuinely best for the other person, clearly showing they are willing to consider the needs of the other person before themselves. That sort of action, paired with the gospel that is dripping in grace, that has real currency in Christian ministry, because that is the gospel model that we have been shown by Jesus. And this is true of pastoral ministry and my relationships with all of you. In a ministry in a church like this, with people from many nations and cultures and subcultures. We really need to get to know people. Ministry is about people. We need to spend time hearing their stories. We need to understand their excitement, and we need to understand their fears. We need to work out how others think. One of my lecturers at Moore College, his name is Archie, he said this, which really stuck with me in one of our courses. He said, you really need to understand the question behind the question. You see, people put on a whole bunch of layers, but understanding what they really need, what their real felt need is, that only comes with time and with dialogue. That comes with knowing people. Tim, his first piece of advice when I was employed here in 2018, his first piece of advice was, when you have a meeting with someone, eat with them and take about 3 hours to do it. Because the first 2 hours is all small talk. And only after that do you get into what people actually feel and think. When they've heard you. You need to know what people are really asking about. And you need to learn these things in the context of deep and trusting relationships. And maybe, perhaps, I've seen this most acutely in the Hope and Healing course, the divorce care program that we run. Trust is built in the significant time spent hearing the stories and journeys of people who are suffering through separation and divorce. The relationship built on care for that person in all their struggles and anxieties and particularities, these things are really important, because without that, they have no space and we have no real permission and platform to share the genuine difference that Jesus makes to hope and to healing. See, we have a genuine wanting that these people, all people, are healed and filled with the hope of eternity. But in order for them to hear it, they need to know us and trust us. And we need to know them and hear what their joys and sadnesses really are. Paul is saying here, not only is this not what the false teachers are doing, but you, his audience, the Corinthians, despite them acting the opposite to how Jesus acted, despite them doing different things to Jesus, you, Corinthians, you lift them up, you esteem them, you bear with them. Again, he's speaking ironically, but he's actually saying, don't do that. Don't put up with that. You don't have to put up with that. You need to get out. You need to leave. You need to get help. Paul is showing them that they have been deceived, just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning in Genesis 3. They've been so deceived that they want leadership from those who hurt them. But they should not, and for what it's worth, we should not. Chapter 11, verse 21, Paul says, with a healthy dose of sarcasm, to my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. Paul is saying, I know you chose the super apostles despite the way they treated you. To my dishonor, I just could not do that. And please hear the sarcasm in Paul's words. As God's leader, he actually has no interest in treating people this way. No interest whatsoever. In verse 21, he frames it as though it is a weakness, a deficiency in his leadership. He frames it as if he needs to make an excuse for why he's not treating them this way. But the tragedy is that they are willing to put up with it and even welcome this kind of leadership. And so hear me correctly so you don't misunderstand what is sarcasm. Hear me correctly. There is no justification in the Bible. There's no justification from Jesus to act in a way that enslaves, exploits, takes advantage of, presumes in arrogance, or physically slaps someone in the face. There is no place for any of this. There is no place for physical or spiritual abuse, as Paul outlines here, and especially not in a church family brought together and looking to submit to Jesus. And if you think that maybe that is how you have acted, or maybe this is how you are being treated, please come and speak with me. If not me, speak with a trusted friend. Speak to your growth team leader. Speak to someone. Speak to someone that you feel safe with. Reach out and get help so you are supported in either stopping what you should not be doing or in helping you to leave a dangerous situation. Let me put it up on the screen so that you really get the point. Don't ever allow others to convince you that it is godly to live with this kind of abuse. God does not want this. Now, understanding this context of what Paul is actually worried about, he then proceeds to display his weakness for everyone to see. And remember, he's doing this foolishly, daring to boast, 11:21. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. But as we'll see, he's boasting as he should. He's boasting as a clay jar. He's already said this much earlier in chapter 4. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. And so he's boasting in his weakness, precisely because anything impressive or life-transforming, that is all from God and not from people. And so a genuine minister of the gospel, a genuine disciple of Jesus, is one who understands that growing people deep and wide in Jesus is God's work and by God's power. Think of what John the Baptist says. In everything, he, Jesus, must increase, and I, the disciple, must decrease. See, when Paul then lists out his boast in weakness, he is proving that he is a genuine minister of the gospel, doing what genuine ministers of the gospel do. They get out of the way and point you to Jesus, who is the real hero. And more, Paul knows that Christ is seen most definitively for who he is in that perceived weak and foolish moment of his crucifixion. Weak and sinful in the eyes of the world, but the power of God for those who see the truth. And so Paul will boast in the weakness that the super apostles mock, to ironically prove that that's what makes him the real deal. So, chapter 11, verse 22. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind for talking like this. I am more. And so he's basically saying, are they? Me too. And finally, are they servants of Christ? Well, if you remember last week, they are more like those who masquerade as apostles, like Satan masqueraded as an angel of light. Are they servants of Christ? Maybe, but if they are, I am more. Again, there is some sarcasm here. The more is the same word used to ironically describe the super apostles as super. He's saying that they are all these things, including servants of Christ, then I am more. I am a more super servant than they are. And then he goes on to talk about how much harder he has worked. And what you'd assume is he'd talk about all his great church planting exploits, his missionary journeys to the Gentiles, all the good stuff that's in the book of Acts. But instead, look at what he says with scathing irony from 23. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rod. Once I was pelted with stones. See, it's not just that all of this was shameful, but it was also painful. He's saying, I've been flogged, I've been beaten beyond measure, I've even been pelted with stones. There was a limit on 39 lashes at any one time, because anything more than that would probably mean death. And this happened to Paul on 5 occasions. They were from the Jews. They happened in the synagogues. Deuteronomy 25 explains this. When people have a dispute, they are to take it to a court, and the judges will decide the case, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty. If the guilty person deserves to be beaten, the judge shall make them lie down and have them flogged in the presence with the number of lashes the crime deserves. But the judge must not impose more than 40 lashes. If the guilty party is flogged more than that, your fellow Israelite will be degraded in your eyes. Or let's put it in another way, the Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus, he says this, he calls this punishment a most disgraceful penalty. It's not only painful to the point of death, but it is shameful. And if the lashes came from the Jews, then the beatings with rods, that came from the Romans, in the Gentile territories that Paul visited. He suffered the indignity of these beatings despite being a Roman citizen. And if the Jews and Romans inflicted those things, well then stoning, it seems like, was mob violence. In Acts 14, he's almost stoned in Iconium, and then shortly after, he's actually stoned in Lystra. Have a look at Acts 14. Some Jews came to Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. Do you see the kind of spiritual CV that Paul is laying out here? I mean, imagine the shame and the hurt. The Jews, the Romans, the mob mentality, including the Greeks. 9 times in this list so far, Paul has virtually been on the edge of death at the hands of everyone because he's a genuine minister of the gospel. Almost death wasn't enough, though. Paul then also faces dangers. Look at the repetition. Literally, the word danger is used multiple times. 25 and 26. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. There seems to be opposition to Paul everywhere. And it seems linked to every aspect of his travel as an apostle to the Gentiles. He went from place to place and faced danger on boats, and danger when crossing rivers without bridges, and danger when he wasn't welcome from people, and danger traveling on roads, and danger with robbers, and danger in big cities, and danger in backwater towns, and danger from false believers, just like the super apostles who dilute and distort the message of the gospel. And along with all of that near-death experience and all of the dangers, there is also toiling. 27, I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and I have been naked. He's been stretched out, battered and bruised, cold and vulnerable, working long hours with his hands as a tent maker to not be a burden on those he's ministering to. He's done all of these things and more. And despite all of these things, the greatest suffering of the Apostle Paul is his worry for the churches. 28 and 29, beside everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn? See, Paul has a deep concern, a heart for the people under his care. He burns inwardly for them as they are led into sin by others who are willing to exploit them. He has that godly jealousy, remember? He has love for the people of the church, the people who he shared the gospel with. These are the people who he nurtured, the people who he is desperate to continue to walk with Jesus and not be deceived by the cunning of false teachers and Satan. He hurts and agonizes and stresses, and he feels weak for them. He pours everything he has emotionally and spiritually for them, and he wrings himself completely dry for them. Look at verse 29. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn? See, this is where it really hurts. And if you have been in this kind of scenario, then you'll know that this is where it really hurts. Any of us who are Christian followers of Jesus, any of us who are invested in the lives of fellow Christians and see them stumbling or struggling or tempted to fall away from Christ Jesus, any of those sorts of things cause us to feel weak and to burn, don't they? This is Christian ministry. It's weakness. I mean, think about these scenarios and then put your own scenario within them. Someone you know and love and have walked alongside is struggling with a big negative event in their life, a loss of a loved one, or a big change in life circumstances that just feels so unjust. They are questioning God and wondering why this happened to them. and they are questioning everything, and they are wondering if God is even real, or how God could let this happen to them and then still be genuinely loving. And if you're in that scenario of getting alongside that friend, do you not feel weak and burn? Because you can't do anything about that. You don't have control of their heart, not like God does. Or someone you know and love and have walked alongside is saying they're going to leave church because they've been offended, and everyone around them feels like a hypocrite, and life has just been too difficult, and they just don't feel supported and cared for like they should by their community. And you are worried for them. You are worried for their needs to be met. You are worried that they will land in another church. You are worried that they might start to doubt Jesus. You are worried that they will stop attending church and being encouraged because of the flaws of people within a church. You worry they will only see the flaws and not the beauty of a family that is bought by the blood of Christ, adopted into their Father's house. And how can you not feel weak and inwardly burn? Or someone you know and love and have walked alongside is in a vulnerable situation of flirting with temptation or sin. Someone is tempted to step outside of their marriage and commit adultery, or feels sexually neglected and turns to pornography, or feels trapped by the supposed rules and regulations of the Bible and wants to experience what it feels like to be sexually promiscuous and experiment with the freeing and fun and satisfying things that the world apparently has to offer. But you're worried about their vulnerability, that they will be psychologically and physically exploited, that they will turn and be in danger of doing something that will cause deep pain and hurt, and from which it is very difficult, humanly speaking, to come back. Or that they'll feel so guilty that it will look to them like they can never come back to the open arms of Jesus, because He would never be willing to forget and forgive the disastrous thing that they had done. They won't be willing to come back for forgiveness, and you're desperately worried that they are caught in ungodly grief from which there is nowhere to find a solution. And you're desperately worried because they don't want to hear what God has to say, or they can't hear what God has to say because the noise of their guilt and their shame is just too loud. And if you're in that situation of standing alongside that friend, how can you not feel weak and inwardly burn? Because your best laid words and Bible passages and plans, they just don't work. For Paul, you see, this is the biggest daily pressure. His concern for the people of God. Paul is relational. He's concerned for every single person, including the least sister or brother. He has burning in his heart. In his heart is overflowing compassion. In his heart is a godly jealousy. In his heart is a zeal for evangelism, that people who don't know hear and know and really inwardly digest the reality of Jesus. In his heart is the tenderness of a father towards their children that he loves and feels responsible for. And if you look at the people around you, is that what you feel for your church family? Because whether you are in a formal ministry or not, this is the ministry of the gospel that you have with each other. For whatever reason, God has brought us together as a church family that we might help each other to walk with Jesus. And that means that when one steps out, how can we not feel weak and inwardly burn? See, as you see this list, can you see the contrast between what the false apostles are doing with their impressive rhetoric and how good they look, and what Paul is doing? Paul is boasting in his weakness and shame and sufferings. These value systems could not be further apart. Paul is displaying just how much of a clay jar he really is. Anyone who thinks that gospel ministry is really impressive, and it means that then you can be famous in the world and you can be one of those tele-evangelists who are just loved and adored by everyone, That's not gospel ministry. Paul is stopping that right in its tracks. These value systems could not be further apart. Paul is hated by every group. He's in danger because of every group. He is toiled and stretched, and he has no rest. And on top of all of those things, he has a godly concern for all the people in all the churches. He loves them deeply, and he is imitating Christ in his other person-centered approach to the ministry that he has been entrusted by God. He's not in any way like the false teachers who are self-serving, comparing others to themselves in order for their gain and to boast about how great they are. And so Paul says, 11:30, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. And all of this because Paul is weak. It is God's power that matters. That is what makes an apostle of Christ, a servant of Christ, a disciple of Christ, following the model and pattern that comes from God. Following the model and pattern that comes from Christ. Understanding where the power actually comes from. And that's really the takeaway message here. The paradigm of Christian ministry is that we are weak. And everything comes through Christ's strength. And that means that ministry, living for Jesus, will be hard. You should expect to suffer. Expect that times it will be physically and emotionally burning to the point of debilitating. Expect it because we follow a crucified Christ. See, it's very hard sometimes to get into this mindset because we think I'm never going to be whipped, beaten, and stoned. But this exact sentiment comes up when you have children who don't listen and who feel like they're walking away from Jesus. Do you not inwardly burn during those times? Are you not scared during those times? The reality is that this is what it is like to live the Christian life. Don't get lured in by the appeal of the ease and comfort of glorious looking and impressive and fancy ministries. Don't follow the abusers, the enslavers, the exploiters, the ones that promise you a suffering-free life of discipleship with lots of worldly successes as you walk with Jesus. That is not the apostolic ministry to which we have been called. Heed the warning of the Apostle Paul, who is writing that we might see Christ's ministry for what it is. Our weakness, God's strength. Let me say it again. Our weakness, God's strength. But also, be ashamed of boasting. We live in a city that loves to boast. It's all about success. It's all about putting yourself forward. It's about the reality that you have to be in it to win it. And yes, we want to be on the front foot about evangelism and engaging with our community, but we always need to watch that we don't fall into the trap of personal boasting. How good is this ministry that I started? How many goals have we kicked in this ministry that we're part of? Here is how multi-ethnic ministry should be done. Look at Auburn. The irony and sarcasm that Paul uses as he boasts in his weakness is to show that boasting has no place in Christian ministry. It's all about Jesus. We are clay jars. And finally, as Paul has beautifully modeled here, admitting weakness appropriately can be very helpful. Appropriately done, this is so helpful for brothers and sisters in Christ to see. Very hard to do, even harder when you're being criticized and attacked. But done well, being vulnerable and admitting weakness does the beautiful thing of pointing people to Christ. It itself is a testimony of God working through broken people. So here it is, my weakness. I am a divorced, sinful, struggling, imperfect, sometimes hurting, sometimes shamed by my own actions and thoughts, Christian man. But I am a Christian man chosen by an all-powerful God with a love that I cannot fully understand because it is so magnificent, given a godly and beautiful wife in Ankita, given the privilege of preaching and teaching and pastoring and modeling just how good God is despite my weakness. And not just to this church, but to every person that I get to be in contact with. You see, the reality is it's so easy when people see you and see this perfect person with a perfect job who seems to be smiling all the time and always everything is wonderful and right and good. But nobody is like that. Everybody has stuff. If all of your deepest, darkest secrets and weaknesses were to be displayed on the screen, none of you would be able to show your face in this church because you'd be so ashamed. But to appropriately model your weakness and God wanting to come to you despite that weakness, that is a testimony of the gospel. Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to the cross I cling, is how the song goes. That is a wonderful thing. God not only works through us, but He has a use for us. That is profoundly beautiful and meaningful. We are disciples of the suffering, vulnerable, crucified Christ. And as we display this to those around us in the world, we do the wonderfully magnificent work of showing the great power of God who loves us and sustains us despite ourselves.